Hello everybody and welcome back to the show. We're setting up to pull the top cover off of old 1768, the narrow RD6. We've had this off once before, but I set it back on to keep the weather out of that rear case until I was ready to begin taking the powertrain apart. And we are at that point right now. So I just need to get everything set here. We'll get chained up and then we'll lift. Set the brake pedals. I don't want to hook one and break it. And we'll take the saddle cover off again for good this time. And now it's time to drain the fluid. This is some really thick stuff, so it'll take a little bit for it all to run out. At least these Caterpillars give us big drain plugs. Blah! Wow, is it grimy black back there. We're going to be cleaning on that tub for a while. So as long as we're waiting for that to drain, I want to catch you all up on the progress that's been happening off camera. As you all well know, I've been using old stovepipe here, the first Diesel 40 parts unit that I hauled home, as like a practice run, okay? And I've been doing the majority of this off camera. Reason being, I've never been this far into the back end of one of these size tractors before, and it's been a lot of, well, sit here and stare at it and then go and reference some literature and come back out and stare at it, try something, oh that didn't work, try something else, oh okay, that's how it works. That's what we've been doing. So it really hasn't been anything that's been video worthy. Another reason for that is, oddly enough, Caterpillar never wrote a service manual for this size tractor. So we're talking like Diesel 35, Diesel 40, RD6 2HD6. It's like this was a gap in their literature line. I think the reason for that is these are basically scaled down versions of the D7 and the D8. So they had plenty of literature out on those already, and they perhaps assumed that the servicemen could just fill in the gaps. That's just my guess. So what I am trying to do here is structure these episodes as like a video stand-in reference for that missing shop manual. And if I'm going to do that, I had better have all my ducks in a row first before I even turn this camera on. Otherwise, if I'm trying to put myself in the position of here's how you do it, and then people see me struggle, they're not going to take me seriously. So that's the reason for that. Interesting little tidbits on stovepipe. I figured out how the finals come apart on this side. Well, because the last person that was into this side, I don't think pressed anything back on, so it was falling apart loose. And oh, did we find some things. Look at this dead axle. Look at all the pulled metal, okay? Look at that wear step. That's how much material is just gone right through there. I also think it's bent, but it's hard to tell with these tapers. I'll know better after I get it pulled out. What caused this, though? It looks like the bearings that were underneath the bow gear hub just collapsed, completely collapsed. And the track tension pulled the sprocket and the bow gear and everything forward, and that hub just ground on the back of that dead axle, and they ran that thing for hours that way before finally fixing it. And they just put new parts over the top of all of that damage and called her good. This side is still together because I believe this side was pressed together properly the last time someone was in there. So I had to order some special tooling. I have quite a lot of, I invested heavily in pullers this week. Just telling you right now. But I also have some raw materials coming to make a few adapters, and it's been rather eye-opening when you get into Caterpillar tractors of this size, how much you have to equip yourself if you're going to do most anything on the back end, because just about everything is a press fit and it's all big. So that's how you play the game. We've invested pretty heavily in these next few episodes that are coming up, but that's the way of it. So, all right, we've yammered enough. I think we can begin the powertrain teardown on old 1768 here. So let's get going. All right, first thing we have to do is isolate all of our driveline gearing from the final drives. And the way we do that is we unbolt these steering clutch / brake drums from these pinion flanges in here. And for a visual aid, we've got old stovepipe. I can show you exactly what I'm talking about. So here is the pinion flange. You can see the bolt holes that go all the way around. There are 10 of them. And here is the drum, the threaded holes where all of those flange bolts go into. Once again, 10 of them. And the bolts go from the outside in. Now, it's too tight to fit a wrench in through here to get at those bolts from the top, so they gave us a big plug on each side. So one right here, and the other one right there. So we take those plugs out, and that's our access to those bolts. There's the bolt. They are a 3/4 inch head. And it's really easy to drop them. Okay, we got this one out with the socket, so that worked well. No big deal if we drop them. We're taking all that out anyway. Now what we do, roll the drum until the next one comes into register. There, I see it. And repeat 10 times. I took all 10 bolts out of both sides, and now we can pry the drums away from the flanges. All right. Boy, this one must be full of some sticky grease. Barely wants to slide on those clutch teeth. There we go. Our gap opened up right there. We'll do the same with this one. Yeah, this one moves a lot easier, like it's supposed to. There. So what we did, we just broke the power link. Our steering clutches spline into the teeth that are on the insides of these drums, and the drums bolt to those flanges, and the flanges power the final drives. So we just broke the link there is all we did. And the reason for doing that first is it makes the rest of the disassembly now easier. So we can throw this in gear, we can do whatever we want, and we can spin all of this stuff much easier. Plus, those sprockets aren't trying to claw their way forward inside those track chains. Okay, normally you wouldn't have an attachment on the back like this. PTO or belt pulley drives also went back here, but we have this in our way, so we'll have to deal with this before we do anything to the gears. It's crazy simple how these are powered. This is the input shaft to that PTO right here, and that is a splined coupling that grabs onto the splined back end of that upper transmission shaft. So we'll engage the PTO drive just like that, and with the transmission in neutral, the engine would be spinning the clutch, which spins just the upper transmission shaft. You see none of those gears in the bottom are spinning, and that upper transmission shaft spins that input into the PTO, which is what turns into the rotational power that comes out the back. This design, though, created another problem. So you're providing stationary power. Engine is spinning the clutch clutch is spinning this top shaft, and the top shaft is just grinding away on that PTO or belt drive. The issue arises because the oil level in the transmission compartment is only high enough for those bottom gears to pick up and throw around, and those gears throwing that oil is what lubricates your top shaft. So if you're spending a lot of time running in neutral, this top shaft is basically running dry because it's so far above the oil level. So Caterpillar's fix for that was this brass tag, and here's a photo of it so it's easier for you to read. And it says, observe the following instructions twice daily. First, disengage flywheel clutch. Second, shift gears into high. Third, release both steering clutches and engage flywheel clutch for 1 minute. And to see what they're talking about, main clutch disengaged so transmission stops spinning. Put transmission into gear. Release both steering clutches, which mimics what we did by taking the bolts out of those drums. You can spin all this gearing without the final drives trying to move the tractor, all right? Then you re-engage main clutch, keeping both steering clutch levers disengaged, and that spins that bottom shaft. It throws oil all over the place, and it lubricates itself back up. Ready for another stationary run. But my favorite part of this tag is the last line. Caution, do not let go of steering clutch levers until flywheel clutch has been released. Yeah, because then the thing would want to take off and rip itself away from whatever it was powering, and oh, it'd be a day. And personally, I think I'd like to have more than 2 minutes of lubrication time in a whole day's worth of work. That's just me. It also proves, true fact here, that if you want to be a 1930s era cat skinner, you needed 3 arms and 3 hands. I wouldn't make that up. But no, really, on this note, and then we'll move on. When I was a kid growing up, there was still an old 1940s D8 that was stationed in one of the iron mine pits about 2 hours north of here, and that thing was worn out. It barely kept the tracks on it parked. They got all the money out of that thing. But what they did was turn it into a stationary power unit. I don't know if it had a drive on the back, but they could have just as easily hooked onto that back transmission shaft. And the way they got around the lubrication problem, they just overfilled that whole gear compartment with oil right to the top. And that sat there and it just ground away for another 20 years, providing power to that plant. So that's another way around it, but you wouldn't want to do that on a tractor that you'd also want to drive somewhere. So let's get that PTO off the back. 6 fasteners hold the PTO drive to the back of the main case. 4 studs and 2 bolts. Okay, so the 2 bolts are on each side, one right there, one over there. They came out easily. 3 of the 4 studs, well, the nut was so rusted to the threads that it's pulling the stud with it. So I've had to break the PTO away from the case slowly and drift those 3 studs out with it. We're getting it though. And always be sure to keep the drive coupling with the attachment, because without the drive coupling, the attachment's no good for anything. Oh, come on. There we go. All right, working back around to the front, we can take the clutch off next. So I'll unlock it. Should be able to do it with the pry bar. Yep. Now, they do things a little bit backwards with this clutch. You see this heavy center section that rotates inside of the front and rear pressure plates. Well, typically this center section is what holds the friction material, but in this case it's just a solid block of steel. All your friction material is riveted to the front plate here and to the back plate right here. So this is kind of like a pressure plate in the center. It's funny, and there's a big flat roller Hyatt style bearing down in the center of this this middle section that runs on the input shaft. I almost need a bigger pliers to get this cotter pin out. There we go. All right, so yeah, that's the first thing, get that pin out of that castle nut. And while I was fighting with that, I was looking around and noticed all 4 of the over center clutch dogs have been built up with brazing. Yeah, this clutch has done a lot of clutching. Okay, there's one gear. What I'm doing now, there, I've locked the transmission in 2 gears simultaneously, and what that does, it holds this input shaft solid so that I can put a wrench with a great big handle on there, get that castle nut off. And this is an 1 7/8" size nut. Now, we have 2 threaded holes on the face of this front plate for a puller, but if you're not rusted onto the splines, yeah, you should be able to take both plates and that heavy center section off of the input shaft. And already, this is heavy. And I thought I heard something jingle a little suspiciously when I pulled that off. We'll take this out of here, the center sleeve, and look at this. That roller bearing is shot. It has not rolled for a long time. These all have flat spots on them. Here we go. Some are loose. That used to be a roller. It's not even round anymore. These are very dangerous clutches because if that ever decided to grab, it's going to transmit rotational force right through the sleeve, right into that input shaft, even if the main clutch is disengaged. This thing could have started driving itself with the main clutch disengaged. Wow. Okay, now to remove the clutch spider and hub. You can see I'm working on this bottom bolt that holds the center bronze release collar to our throwout yoke. So these bolts act as a pivot. One on the bottom right here, and you can see that straight section there, that's the pivot portion of it. Top one now, these are both a 1 5/16" sized head. Fairly common fastener size on RD6s I have found. Alright, here's our top one. And this one is supposed to have an oil catch cup up there as well. It's hollow like a banjo bolt. That's where the oil cup that's out on the platform feeds oil into that release yoke. That cup is gone though. And with the release yoke completely disconnected from the spider and hub, they just slide right off the shaft. Now we can pivot this release lever forward enough to disengage that yoke. The ball socket on the other end just slides right out. So there's our yoke. And finally, the shaft with lever will slide out of the case. Of course, I think the keyway on this outside was a little bit wallowed. That's where the external lever from the main clutch attaches. So usually they slide through better than that, but yeah, there we are. Well, everybody, that sun is, there we are, not sticking around for very long, so we're gonna wrap it right here. We covered everything that comes out the back, and we covered everything that goes in the front. So next time we'll start covering everything else that's left in the middle. Transmission will be first, and then we'll work our way back to bevel gear, cross shaft, steering clutches, all of that good stuff. And hopefully by then, some of the tooling we're waiting on to finish that stovepipe tub will be here. So I hope y'all enjoyed this episode. It's about to get heavy. Trust me. Next time we'll be using the tractor to lift just about everything else out of there. So not be on the lookout. Be looking forward to that. That's better. All right, everyone. As always, I thank you for watching. Hope to see you back next time.